Hello, and welcome to the Book Tapestry. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in a prison that had no bars? What if there were no guards in sight, yet you never felt more watched than you do right now? In the late 18th century, the philosopher Jeremy Bentham dreamt up a haunting architectural concept called the Panopticon. It was designed as a circular inspection house where a single central tower could potentially observe every single prisoner at once. But here was the brilliance, or perhaps the true horror, of the design. The prisoners didn't actually need to be watched 24/7. They just had to know that they could be. Because they never knew exactly when the eyes were on them, they became their own jailers, policing their own behavior as if surveillance were a permanent fact of life. I'm Sophia Wordsmith, and this is episode 17. Today, we are looking at how that stone and iron nightmare has evolved into something far more elegant and, frankly, far more expensive. In Dave Eggers' novel The Circle, we see this concept miniaturized into the sea change camera, a pebble-sized device that renders the world totally visible and puts that central tower right in our pockets. But have you noticed the twist in our modern reality? We don't fear this tower anymore. We buy it. We wear it on our wrists and invite it into our bedrooms. We are moving away from what Michel Foucault called sovereign power, the old-school right of the state to punish, and into the era of biopower, the right to regulate, measure, and manage life itself. This isn't just about security in the traditional sense. It's about rebranding surveillance as a moral necessity, a medical benefit, and a social alibi. So, how did the digital world become a benevolent panopticon? How did we reach a point where the walls have been replaced by interfaces, and our own eager participation is the very thing that keeps us confined? Let's dive in. The shift from physical stone walls to digital interfaces is maintained through what Foucault called a meticulous anatomy of detail. In his seminal work, Discipline and Punish, Foucault argued that modern institutions don't actually need to rely on rare, spectacular displays of punishment to keep people in line. Instead, they operate through a microphysics of power. This power isn't a blunt instrument, it's a fine-tuned mechanism that organizes our behavior by managing every second of our time and every inch of our space. Think about the classic tools of enclosure: the cell, the rank, and the timetable. Whether it is a school with its rigid periods, a factory with its precise shifts, or an army with its repetitive drills, these structures are designed to create docile bodies, individuals who eventually learn to regulate themselves because they have internalized exactly what the institution expects of them. They no longer need a guard standing over them because the guard has been built into their own conscience. In the world of the circle, and increasingly in our own daily lives, has the physical body become secondary to the digital profile? Take the protagonist, May Holland. Her life isn't defined by grand, heroic events, but by a relentless, exhausting stream of microtasks. She has to respond, she has to like, she has to upload, and she has to react. This constant digital maintenance functions as a modern Foucauldian timetable, slicing her consciousness into tiny, manageable intervals that leave no room for wandering thoughts. It is, quite literally, a form of training. Just as Foucault analyzed the soldier's carriage, the specific, unnatural way a soldier is taught to hold their chin, their shoulders, and their rifle, May is being trained into a specific digital posture of perpetual responsiveness. This is the hidden labor of the platform. By cleverly framing data generation as self-expression or socializing, the circle targets what Foucault called idleness. In the past, the great confinement of the 17th century tried to eliminate unproductive time by locking the idle behind walls. In our age, silence and invisibility are the new forms of idleness. If you aren't posting, you aren't just being private, you are being suspicious. You are a data void that the system cannot monetize. Every zing and every like becomes a kinetic drill of the information age, turning every twitch of your thumb into a micro-contribution to the institution's wealth and your own digital incarceration. While the digital timetable meticulously organizes May's time, it is what Foucault called the medical gaze that organizes her very soul. Foucault introduced this transformative concept in his work The Birth of the Clinic, describing a historical shift where doctors stopped seeing patients as individuals with personal stories and began seeing them as biological specimens to be mapped, measured, and decoded. In this clinical environment, the language of the patient, their subjective feelings and descriptions, was replaced by the language of the legion, where the truth of a person's health was found only in what could be physically observed or measured. The circle takes this cold, clinical gaze and pushes it out of the hospital and directly into the home, effectively turning the entire world into a giant, living laboratory. May is no longer treated as a person with agency. She is reduced to a set of shifting metrics, participation percentages, sleep cycles, and average heart rates. The wristbands she wears function as a polygraph of the soul, tracking every biological tremor and nervous spike as if they were evidence in a trial. What happens when the system views this biometric data as far more authoritative than May's own words? If May insists to her colleagues that she is fine and happy, but her engagement metrics are dropping and her heart rate suggests stress, the system ignores her voice and trusts the data. It assumes that the body speaks a truer language, a biological truth that the individual is either too ignorant to understand or too deceptive to acknowledge. This creates what we can call an automated confession. You are constantly speaking through your pulse and your activity levels even when you choose to stay silent. This represents a critical turning point where privacy is no longer seen as a civil right, but as a pathology. Within the logic of the circle, solitude is diagnosed as a symptom of depression, disloyalty, or social deviance. By treating every private act or moment of silence as a sign of potential sickness, the system justifies constant, invasive intervention under the benevolent guise of care. You aren't a citizen with a fundamental right to be left alone. You are a patient under permanent observation whose secrecy is merely a symptom waiting to be cured through the medicine of total transparency. The medicalization of May's life leads inevitably to what Foucault called the normalization of judgment. This is where the system stops just watching you and starts grading you against everyone else. Foucault argued that disciplinary power works by establishing a norm, a cold, statistical average, of what is considered acceptable or productive behavior, and then using constant examinations to classify, rank, and correct anyone who dares to drift away from that average. In the world of the circle, this philosophical concept is perfectly embodied by the PartiRank and the relentless social metrics that dominate every screen on campus. For Foucault, the examination is more than just a test. It is the deployment of force and the establishment of truth. It is the moment where the institution decides who you are based on your data. But the true genius of the circle's design is that the system is lateral. Users discipline each other. The circle doesn't actually need a fleet of guards because every single citizen becomes a voluntary enforcer of the norm. You aren't just being watched by a central tower. You are being watched, rated, and judged by your peers in a 360-degree web of social pressure. Even those at the very top, the exceptional high performers, aren't actually free. Foucault's analysis of the model student or the perfect soldier fits May Holland perfectly as she frantically climbs the company leaderboards. Once she reaches the top, she becomes trapped in a state of hypervisibility. When you are at the top of the rank, the spotlight is brightest, and to fall even a single percentage point is to be marked as failing or disloyal. In many ways, the high scorer is the most incarcerated person on the campus. Because they have the most status to lose, they must perpetually perform their loyalty and their circleness with more intensity than anyone else. This is the tragedy of the normative trap. The closer you get to the institutional ideal, the less freedom you actually have to be different, to be silent, or to be eccentric. May's internal sense of self-worth is eventually outsourced to a rolling average of her coworkers' approval. She no longer asks, "Who am I?" but rather, "What is my score?" Her soul hasn't just been monitored, it has been replaced by a metric. This relentless pressure to normalize isn't just maintained through social metrics, it is fueled by what Foucault called pastoral power. This isn't a violent, coercive power that beats you into submission, rather, it is the shepherd-like guidance we traditionally associate with religious or social institutions. The leaders of the circle, the three wise men, don't present themselves as dictators, they present themselves as benevolent caretakers. They justify the implementation of total surveillance through a series of noble, almost utopian promises: the end of child kidnapping, the total elimination of political corruption, and the ultimate eradication of crime. This benevolence is the system's greatest weapon, because it makes the loss of privacy feel like a small, perfectly reasonable price to pay for total social safety. Foucault noted that power is at its most potent and its most dangerous when we perceive it as a benefit rather than a burden. After all, if a sea change camera prevents a horrific crime, how can you possibly argue against its existence? To do so makes you look like you support the crime itself, or that you have something dark to hide. This is the passive-aggressive heart of the benevolent Panopticon. It frames any desire for privacy or dissent as a profound moral failure. As May Holland sinks deeper into this world, she eventually realizes she must perform happiness as a kind of forensic alibi. In The History of Sexuality, Foucault describes the incitement to discourse the idea that modern power demands we speak our truths and confess our inner lives in order to be free. May is incited to speak her happiness constantly through her digital presence. Her forced smile becomes the uniform of her docility. In a world of total transparency, a neutral face is a threatening face because it cannot be read, categorized, or predicted by the machine. May is no longer allowed the luxury of a neutral interiority. She must manifest the approved public emotions of the collective at all times. This leads to the ultimate corporate goal of completion, the total erasure of all human blind spots. Like a plague-stricken town from the 17th century where every person is strictly accounted for and no one moves without a record, the system fears the void of an untracked actor. Without a complete data history, the system cannot predict behavior, and without prediction, it cannot exercise governmentality. Foucault term for the management of entire populations through the cold calculation of probability and risk. The true underlying horror of the circle isn't simply that a system of total surveillance exists, it's the realization that we have begun to voluntarily crave it. We don't run from the light, we seek out visibility because it promises us recognition, safety, and a comforting, if manufactured, sense of belonging to something bigger than ourselves. May Holland doesn't feel like she's trapped in a prison because the system is constantly whispering in her ear, telling her that it is simply optimizing her best self and helping her reach her full potential. As Michel Foucault famously argued, power is at its most effective when it becomes completely invisible, when it stops being a force that acts upon you and becomes a force that acts through you. It is the moment when you carry the system inside yourself, making the external walls and the iron bars entirely redundant. By the closing pages of the story, May has internalized the gaze so completely that she no longer requires a guard to tell her what to do or how to feel. She has successfully become both the prisoner and the warden of her own mind. Foucault once wrote a haunting prediction in The Order of Things, suggesting that the individual is a relatively recent invention of modern thought, an invention that might soon be erased. Like a face drawn in the sand at the very edge of the sea, waiting for the tide to come in. In the world of the circle, that erasure is finally finished. The private self, with all its messy secrets and quiet contemplations, is gone. It has been filled with a terrifying, permanent light that leaves no room for shadows or for the soul. This is the benevolent Panopticon, a prison we build for ourselves, one like and one share at a time. It's a world where completion means the end of the human mystery. Thank you for joining me, Sophia Wordsmith, on this deep dive into the digital prison and the philosophy of Michel Foucault. As you go about your day, keep your eyes open to the systems around you. Notice the digital posture you're being asked to hold. And maybe, just for a moment, find a corner of the world where you can turn the camera off. Thank you for listening to The Book Tapestry. If you found this helpful, please share it with a friend who prefers listening over reading. See you next time.